In fairy tales and high adventures, there is often a romantic conquest. They are there to motivate the hero in their quest and often don't do that much within the actual story. Well, throw that crap out the window for the James Bond film series, because the Bond women are a great bunch of characters, most of whom transcend that stereotype. However, the public perception is still very much that of a sex symbol waiting to be rescued at some point during the film. I mean, come on, that doesn't happen all the time in this series. In fact, I've counted 8 out of 27 films where that doesn't happen at all. In all seriousness, most of these women do more than just be kidnapped in their respective films, and we have a wide assortment of quality amongst them. As per usual, some housekeeping needs to be done. Only the main Bond woman will be counted for a film, although that can sometimes be a gray area. But hey, what else is new with this series? Thanks to the Craig films, we've actually had an entry where there is no main official Bond woman, and even a film that has a returning lead. So while I'm counting the 2 unofficial films, I'll only have 25 contenders. Finally, my opinion of these characters will not be taking physical attractiveness into account. This series often glorifies beauty, and so it'd be like picking between apples and oranges with a lot of this list. A lot of the actors and actresses are stunningly attractive people anyways, but none of my previous lists took that into account, and so it's not going to matter here. Anyways, enough dawdling. As Roger himself put it,
when one is in Egypt, one should delve deeply into its treasures.
They have. I'd sell everything and live in a tent before I give up.
Stacey Sutton is probably the most derided Bond woman of the series, and I feel bad for Tanya Roberts. It's not her fault the character is bland, a nuisance that adds little to the film, but it is kind of her fault for having little chemistry with Roger Moore and having those ear-piercing whines. I could almost just write here, the screams, and I feel like most fans would know what I'm talking about. To be fair, I like the idea of having her be a geologist and having a previous beef with Zorin so as to have some investment in the story. But all of that stuff happens before the film gets started, and throughout the course of the story, the only substantial thing I can think of that she really does is get Bond access to City Hall, which I feel like Bond could have gotten in there by himself if he had somehow made the connection. So, because Stacey virtually does nothing to enhance A View to a Kill for me, and because her screaming gets on my nerves quickly, she gets to form the bottom of the barrel for the list.
Perhaps we should discuss this matter in comfort, Sir James.
Oh, thank you. What a charming outfit that is. Do you often wear that in the office?
If I wore it in the street, people might stare.
I think I can safely say that this is not the fandom's favorite of Ursula Andress's 2 Bond women. There are a number of women in 1967's Casino Royale that I could have put in this spot, most notably Agent Mimi, but Vesper is the closest to the traditional archetype of a Bond woman, and so that's why she's here. This incarnation of Vesper is the seductress with a secret, and Ursula plays that beautifully. Given that this is a spoof of the film series that only uses some elements from the original novel, I can't expect her to be a faithful adaptation of the character, so I won't ding her for that. Plus, she is in an incoherent mess of a film, so the character inconsistencies I feel are both intentional and unintentional. I do like watching Ursula have fun on screen, but this is not a character you're allowed to get invested in, so why should I put her high? She gets to this point simply for my enjoyment of her performance, not because this character makes any kind of logical sense.
There must be a long tunnel.
Oh, miles of it. Leads all the way. Right up to the top there. And that's where we have to go next. Do you think you can make it?
Of course. It's business.
Good.
I wish I had more positive things to say about You Only Live Twice's Kissy Suzuki, given that in the novels, she's the mother of Bond's child. In the film, Kissy is a field agent that gets paired up with Bond to find Spectre's lair, and then goes back to bring in the cavalry for the finale. She's really underdeveloped, and I think part of that is because she is introduced way too late in the film, and because she is upstaged by Aki. Aki gets much more screen time with Connery, and there's quite a bit more chemistry there. You could actually make the argument that Aki is the main Bond woman for the film, but I'm going with Kissy given that she survives the film. I'm not really that interested when watching her scenes with Connery, but that could also be because she and Connery don't feel like they have a lot of life to each other. They don't get many opportunities to develop any kind of chemistry. And during the final battle, she may as well be a background soldier. Finally, I have to mention the dubbing. Kissy is the most egregious example to me of this in the early films of the series. Not once do I believe that voice came out of Miyahama. The actress isn't doing anything wrong with the part really, but she's never allowed to make much of an impact beyond the visual, and thus she's one of my least favorite Bond women.
Goodnight. You know I'd much rather have dinner with you.
Oh, I understand, James. Please hurry back.
I'll ring as soon as I do. A midnight snack might be just the thing.
I'll keep the wine properly chilled.
And everything else warm, I trust.
I'm torn on The Man with the Golden Guns, Mary Goodnight. On the one hand, Britt Ekland is having a lot of fun playing the character, and I have a good time watching her in the first half. Her parts in the scenes with Bond there are quite charming, and he comes off as a bit of a dick for treating her like he does. However, somewhere towards the middle of the film, probably the bedroom scene, she loses those qualities I liked, and she becomes a dangling nuisance, and the script doesn't seem to know what to do with her. Plus, she unnecessarily puts Bond in more danger twice on Scaramanga's Island, so she just comes off as incompetent. That second half really ruins the goodwill I had towards her in the beginning, and so I must conclude that she's one of the weakest women overall, despite my wanting to like her more.
Too strong for you?
I can learn to like it, if I have the time.
How much time have you got?
Until dawn. What about you?
Oh, I'm just here for the birds.
As you'll notice with this list, every so often the writers like to come up with a character who is meant to be Bond's equal in the field. That can work very well, but it can also backfire. Die Another Day's Jinx is part of the second camp. This is not the actress's fault. Halle Berry is a fine performer, but she doesn't always have the best track record of picking projects that play to her strengths, and I think this is one of those times. I guess Halle and Pierce are fine together, but I see it as more of a friendly colleague relation and less of a romantic one. Plus, the film loves to cut back to her perspective a lot, and it feels like she's hogging the runtime. I know the producers eventually had the idea to spin her off into a separate film, but based off of this, I'm glad that didn't happen. She's also responsible for delivering some of the most cringy moments of the film, but by far the worst is the "Your Mama" line, which so incredibly dates the film as being a product from the early 2000s, and it's juvenile. Seriously, there are few lines in the series that make my eyes roll further to the back of my head than this one. Maybe it's just a personal gripe, because without that line, she might have eventually turned out to be okay and maybe ended up a couple of spaces higher. But for me, both the lines and the aggressive way this film showcases her as trying to one-up Bond at various points really sours my mood on this character. Sorry, Halle. I wish you were given a less obnoxious character so that your talents could shine.
Miss Petachi, no one told me you were here. I am sorry.
You speak English, yes?
Yes, quite well, in fact. Now, hard or soft massage?
Hard, please.
Whenever I start up a new list, I feel a little embarrassed that Never Say Never Again's offerings almost always seem to end up towards the bottom of my list. Kim Basinger is not an actress I've ever really cared for. It's not like she's terrible or anything, I just have yet to see her in something where I really cared about her character. Domino Petachi is the first of 2 iterations of the same character that you'll see on this list, and she's lacking all of the dimensions the other one has. She seems like a mundane girl comfortable in her environment, and gets caught up in a grand event, and she looks just lost to me throughout the film. Basinger seems to know what to do with each of the individual scenes, but I don't get the sense of an overarching cohesiveness to this character, or anything more than the couple of dimensions that I just stated. I'm sure part of that was that she was brought in a little later into the production, so she might not have had as much prep time with the character. But also Never Say Never Again was a film that just underwent so many script rewrites, even while the film was underway, and that's always a risky thing to be doing. Because of that, character arcs can get lost in the shuffle, and I think this version of Domino is an example of that. I think the scope of an arc is there in the finished film, but Kim didn't seem to know where it was all going while the earlier scenes were being filmed, and so she couldn't deliver a cohesive performance and inform the character with that knowledge in mind. This could have turned out to be so much worse, though. This is not a terrible performance or anything like that. But this version of Domino is also not especially noteworthy amongst the roster for me.
Aren't you forgetting?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
By the way, Zlobruskava, Wyochin Harosho Gavariti Pangliski.
Yeah, Chelsea Foxford Day.
Okay, let's try to be fair here. Denise Richards' casting was clearly a cynical studio move. We need a hot American woman so that we can appeal more to the American crowd. And so they cast one of the most beautiful women at the time, who was mostly a pinup girl, to play a nuclear scientist who was going to be one of the smartest women in the series. Now, how did you think this was going to go? Denise does her best, which a lot of the times comes up as serviceable, but at worst, it's downright hilarious. Thankfully, she doesn't grate on my nerves like a few other characters, and like I said, she does do a serviceable job a lot of the time, but this is obviously a case of bad casting, and I can't pin that on Denise. I honestly feel bad for her. She knew why she was there. It seemed like only Barbara Broccoli tried to make her feel welcome amongst the cast, and so this might be a bit more of a pity placement on my part. There are several actresses in big-budget films that get unfairly harassed because of fan backlash, and we need to remember to keep our passions in check about these things. All that said, there's no way around it. The World Is Not Enough's Dr. Christmas Jones is a fine character, played subpar, and so naturally she would come low on this list. I don't truly hate this character, and I have to give Richards credit for trying, but this was an uphill battle thrust upon her, and there was little that could be done. By casting this actress to play this role, the studio practically doomed this character, and despite all the things I've mentioned to try and smooth this over, the fact of the matter is, I still think this is a poor Bond woman.
I have a question.
Well, what's that?
Why, given every other possible option, does a man choose the life of a paid assassin?
Well, it was that or the priesthood.
Dr. Madeleine Swann is the character I feel is the hardest to place on this list. On the one hand, she's one of the great loves of Bond's life, and they certainly cast an actress who can fulfill that role. In No Time to Die, you can see Lea Seydoux' talents, and she has one of the best scenes in the film. However, I have a couple of problems. First, her entire performance, Inspector. She is so cold, has no spark with Bond, and comes off as a bit of a damp squib. I don't buy their romance. And so the moment where she confesses her love to Bond is one of the strangest in the entire film, because I just flinch awake and go, huh? What? When did that happen? Plus, Bond drives off with her at the end of that film, and I'm so confused as to what he sees about her that would make him want to retire, because I certainly don't feel the same way. Second, while No Time to Die does go a long way to redeem her in my eyes, it's not enough, and I don't feel their love as much as I want to. I do feel it more here than I ever did in Spectre, and so I give the film a little bit of credit, but the film only works the way it's intended to if we have the emotional connection with her like we have with several other women on this list. But I don't, and so my emotional investment on the ending is lessened. Had I done this ranking 4 years ago, I might have put Madeleine at the very bottom. Now, she is a bit higher, but not as much as she should be.
What did I do wrong?
Well, it wouldn't do to make a habit of it.
Do you have a woman of your own?
Okay, I feel like I'm gonna get shot for this opinion, but here we go. Being iconic counts for a lot. The first image of Dr. No's honey Ryder coming out of the sea was meant to make a statement. It's unabashed eye candy. Honey Ryder has a backstory of being self-taught in her education and having to fight for herself, never having someone to come in and rescue her. Unfortunately, this isn't enough for me. Beyond the physical beauty of Ursula Andress, the central traits of being proactive and resourceful feel like they could be applied to about a dozen others on this list. Sure, that first image of her on the beach stays with you, but an image doesn't negate the words on the page, which is where Honey falters in my opinion. I don't hate her, but I also don't get the hype around her. This is a case where I think the striking visual and the actress is what people respond to and not so much the character. She may have been the first official Bond woman, but she honestly doesn't seem like she has all that much to put her out in front of the rest of the people on this list, and thus she lands here.
Don't. It's impossible. Knowing you only 2 days and all I can think of is how we would be together.
The Living Daylights' Cara Milovy starts off with one of the strongest hooks into the series. She's the mysterious sniper in the beginning, and it's obvious to Bond that she's being set up. He decides to pull on that thread, and it ultimately does lead him back to Koskov. Later, Cara initiates the raid on the air base because she refuses to let Bond fall back into enemy hands. By this description, she sounds like she should be one of the stronger women in the series. So why am I not enamored with her? I think it's because she seems to be a reactive victim throughout much of the film, and seems so out of her element that she makes some naive choices and mistakes. Sure, she accomplishes the things that I mentioned earlier, but she also insists on going back for her cello at the risk of being caught by the police. She calls Whitaker's base because Bond isn't being honest with her. She rushes the airbase without any real plan of attack, and her show of affection on the plane nearly causes Bond to crash into another plane. She's an incredibly essential element plot-wise, but the idea of having her be a more realistic person and reacting to things like a normal human being might is clashing with Bond's actions, and she honestly seems like more trouble than she's worth. I know some people really like this character, and while I'll walk back on my former statement about her being one of the weakest Bond women, I still don't think she's all that great.
The cards say we will be lovers.
You're mistaken. It's impossible, forbidden for me. Now you must go.
Live and Let Die's Solitaire was never really that interesting in the book, and I think the film offers a major improvement. Way back in my Bond films ranking video, I said Jane Seymour was the weak link of the cast. Now I still think that's true, but only because everyone else seems like an experienced performer and Seymour was just starting out. She does seem to get the character though. She's so focused on her tarot cards and feels as confident in her field as Bond does in his. It's only when the writing's on the wall for her powers that she regresses to a more nervous character. Yet that regression is an interesting way to go with the character that I really like. The thing that's missing here is a chance for her to redeem herself and start to be a bit more assertive. I feel like we might have gotten that if we had spent more time with her and Bond at the train towards the end. There are also a few moments involving her that don't make sense to me, like the card that I think she sent to Bond warning him about Rosie, or the bit in the airfield where she turns on Bond in the company of the henchmen. Solitaire isn't one of my favorites in the series, but she was a fine start to Roger Moore's era.
Dr. Goodhead.
I can only hope your presence here is a coincidence, Mr. Bond. I dislike being spied on.
Oh, don't we all?
I have a similar problem with Moonraker's Holly Goodhead that I do with several others on this list. The voice dubbing is a bit off for me. Unlike those, this one works a bit better and doesn't ruin the performance for me. I do like Lois Child's efforts here, and she's a pretty solid agent. Her introduction at the beginning is a great one, and I love her playfulness with Bond at the Venetian Hotel. However, the constant annoyance she seems to harbor and the frosty dynamic between the two gets old fast. They're supposed to come together and work as partners and become lovers by the end of the film, but I feel like the moment where she makes this turn feels insincere and is over with too quickly. I guess I'm just not sure what her beef was with him in the first place. Calvin Dyson suggested that it might be because of Bond's reaction to her that she's a woman doing these incredible things, but that seems incongruous with the previous films, where Roger has already encountered a mystical witch, several fellow field agents, and a Russian spy who is just as resourceful as he is. Holly Goodhead is a fine example of a typical Bond woman, but she sits towards the middle of Roger's group for me.
I don't expect you to understand. You're English. But I'm half Greek. And Greek women, like Electra, always avenged their loved ones.
Much like Cara Milovy, For Your Eyes Only's Melina Havelock has a really strong starting point. She's driven to revenge out of grief, and she accomplishes part of her plan on her own. When she finds out there's more to the plot and meets up with Bond, she just kind of stops in the development of her character. She stays between grief-stricken and vengeful and doesn't move beyond that. It's a shame, really, because I think she had the potential to be one of the best women in the series. The age difference between her and Roger is also a bit too much for me to fully be on board with their romance, as Bond's affection towards her comes off like that of a tender father figure. In real life, Carol Bouquet was only about a year or two older than BB Doll's actress Lynn Holly Johnson, who Bond is aghast to sleeping with, which doesn't help this issue. At least she looks a bit more mature than BB and feels like she has some traction on her soul. Melina never veers into the bad camp of this list, but if we were to visualize her position as like being that of a race, it's like she did a short sprint to get to her position and then just sort of stayed there without ever trying to move beyond that. However, that start is absolutely wonderful, and she's a very memorable character for me.
Weren't you blonde when I came in?
Could be.
I tend to notice little things like that, whether a girl is a blonde or a brunette.
And which do you prefer?
Oh, providing the collars and cuffs match.
Diamonds Are Forever is a widely disliked film amongst the fan base in my experience, and I can certainly understand why that is. Yet sometimes I just need some camp and laughs in my Bond films, and Tiffany Case just happens to star in one of the films that goes a little overboard on those. Diamonds has some great lines and witty banter, and Tiffany delivers quite a few of those moments. Her dynamic with Connery is great. She has a general likable spunkiness to her, and I enjoy her contribution to the film. My issue with her is that she turns into a bit of a ditz on the oil rig, and really screws up Bond's original plan. Oh well, no one's perfect, right? Jill St. John is an actress I really enjoy, and she does turn in a fun performance. Every so often in Bond films, the companion is there to provide Bond some arm candy, and she has little purpose beyond that. Tiffany is an essential part to the first hour of the film, and even when she loses that essentialness a little later, I do light up when we get to one of her scenes.
You're one of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen.
Thank you, but I think my mouth is too big.
No, it's the right size. For me, that is.
Tatiana Romanova plays one of the more important female parts in a Bond film. From Rush with Love starts out with a ridiculous scenario, and Bond knows it. Yet the girl he meets has to be believable enough in her performance to sell that story. Daniela Bianchi pulls off a really tall order in playing this woman while being so inexperienced at this point in her career. She comes to the British with the offer of the Lecter, but will only go through with the plan if she is satisfied with Bond as her companion. Unbeknownst to Bond, she is a pawn in the larger game and was meant to be discarded as soon as possible. Yet she ends up being the one to kill Rosa Klebb, and that's pretty sweet. As much as I wish she had a bit more spunk or drive to her character, I think that would hurt her credibility in the story. Like, we wouldn't buy that she is manipulated by Spectre if she had a bit more personality behind those looks. She also doesn't get as much to do in the third act as I would like, so that also hurts her standing. Tanya has a lot more weight riding on her than most, and she is definitely believable in that role.
You lost somebody?
I did, yes.
You catch whoever did it?
No, not yet.
Tell me when you do. I'd like to know how it feels.
Finally, a non-romantic companion. Several times in the past, I wish the series had been brave enough to allow Bond not to have a romantic relationship with every main woman, and I'm so glad they did it here. Casino Royale's ending left such an emotional impact on Bond's character that it would have been out of place for him to have a serious romantic entanglement so soon afterwards. While Quantum of Solace does have several problems, Camille Montes is not one of those issues for me. I love that her journey parallels Bond's in that she's getting revenge for the death of a loved one and that she's perfectly capable of taking care of herself. Unlike with Jinx, I actually loved occasionally cutting back to her so that we could see how she was doing. By the end of the film, Camille helps Bond find some peace about Vesper's death so that he can move forward. There's definitely a spark between the two of them that could have been explored later, but neither character was really ready to open up in that way. She's just not used often enough in the film for my taste, and so I cannot in good conscience put her higher.
My dear uncooperative Domino.
How do you know that? How do you know my friends call me Domino?
It's on the bracelet on your ankle.
So, what sharp little eyes you've got.
Wait till you get to my teeth.
Thunderball's version of Domino Derval is my favorite of the two incarnations. She's a kept woman of Largo's and feels like someone who's resigned to her lot in life. She looks for simple pleasures like underwater diving to distract her from her bleak situation, and so she's fascinated by Bond, a man who brings some intrigue and romance into her life. Her reaction to her brother's death is a memorable moment for me because it feels sincere and real. She then tries to process it with the fact that Bond just made love to her while knowing that. She seems like she's hardening her heart at that moment as she now has vengeance to seek against Largo. And to that end, she gets to be the one to shoot him in the film's climax, which is a powerful moment for me. I think that's because we don't get to see Largo's reaction, just the steely look on her face, and honestly, that's all we need. Domino's a solid companion to Bond in this film, and someone I enjoy spending more time with. Mostly because she feels like one of the more real women of the series to me, and she doesn't lose her composure.
We have entered a new era of Anglo-Soviet cooperation, and as a sign of Russian good faith, I'm prepared to make available to you the microfilm recovered by Agent XXX.
With considerable ease, I might add.
Despite You Only Live Twice presenting some female counterparts to Bond in that same field, I think The Spy Who Loved Me gets more of the credit for establishing that trope, and that's because it pulls it off several times better. Anya Amasova is a great character. I love her interactions with Roger, and I adore the idea of pairing a Russian woman with the consummate British male, thus seeing a small representation of the détente period of the Cold War that this film takes place in. In fact, I only have one problem with her. Her voice looping leaves her line delivery so flat that she becomes a little dull to me. Now, the acting is there. Everything on the visual and writing side works for me. I just can't get over that emotionless voice. It's not that it doesn't fit her, it just feels lifeless when I hear it. And so it's like a splash of cold water on my face. She's this high on the list because everything else works for me. But what happened here, folks? Anya has the potential to be one of the best women in the series, but she flounders a little bit for me when she's brought to that pool.
It's mostly dull routine, of course. But every now and then, you get to sail on a beautiful evening like this. I sometimes work with a decadent agent of a corrupt Western power.
They say communists don't know how to have fun.
Okay, my main problem with Wai Lin is that she has no romantic chemistry with Pierce, and so that final scene leaves me feeling a bit hollow. I wanted to get that out of the way first, so that I can have little to do except praise this character. Michelle Yeoh is an amazing actress, and I've loved her in just about everything I've seen her in, even if the film itself I think is pretty terrible. Mummy 3. Wai Lin is another example of the trope of the woman equal to Bond. Sometimes that can be a little off-putting, because in the promotional material leading up to the film, the actresses feel the need to mention how their character isn't the typical Bond girl. But if you've watched this video up to this point, you'll see that most of the women don't come close to fitting that mold. Wai Lin is a very egregious example of the action woman variety, and yet she works because she doesn't annoyingly upstage Bond at every turn. She does make mistakes. She does get captured, is sometimes a step behind in her investigation, and she even sets off the alarm in Hamburg. Yet she does indeed hold her own, and I believe her when she says she could have taken care of the man holding her at gunpoint in the bike shop. Her fight there, by the way, isn't my favorite in the film, mostly because I feel like it's routine and expected. We've got a great martial artist actress, so let's give her a martial arts fighting scene. And yet maybe it's worth it because we don't often get to see Bond women having an action scene that's solely dedicated to them. Wai Lin is one of the best parts of Tomorrow Never Dies, and she's often held in high regard with the general public amongst Bond women, and for good reason.
It's a tough business you picked, Miss Bouvier. Leave it to the professionals.
Look, pal, I was an army pilot. I have flown to the toughest hellholes in South America, and I will not have you lecture me about professionalism.
It's interesting to compare License to Kill's Pam Bouvier with her immediate predecessor, Cara Milovy, because they are weirdly inversions of each other. Whereas Cara is essential to the plot, Pam really isn't. Yet Carrie Lowell does a heck of a job in making Pam an interesting and competent companion. She isn't aggressively portrayed as Bond's equal, but she just naturally carries herself well, and not only insists on helping, but she is nothing but helpful to Bond's personal vendetta. She actually ends up coming to his rescue a few times, most notably in the temple where she helps Bond escape the grinder. I think she and Dalton have a great chemistry, and one of my favorite scenes is when Bond is recruiting her on the boat where they're just talking with each other. Carrie also works well with Desmond Llewellyn, and their dynamic is one of the warmest things in the film. My one gripe with her is actually in the final scene. I kinda hate that we see her so easily hurt by Lupe's attraction to Bond. Not because it makes her seem vulnerable, but because of the aftermath. She seems to easily forgive Bond and makes out with him at the end, which makes her feel like more of a passive object than an active person. I just wish this character had a better final scene in that film. Despite this, I adore Pam, and she's one of my favorite characters in the entire series.
I wondered when you might arrive.
So you are the mysterious Octopussy.
And you are James Bond, 007 License to Kill. Am I to be your target for tonight?
Well, not necessarily.
From this point on, my list weirdly matches up with another Bond YouTuber's list, which was not intentional. Octopussy is my favorite leading lady of the Roger Moore era because she is just so interesting to me. Maud Adams felt understandably a bit out of place with her character in The Man with the Golden Gun, but she just shines in her second attempt here. A jewel smuggler that owns a number of legitimate cover operations, she seems like someone I could buy is that intelligent and crafty. I also love the touch of her having a history with Bond, as it lends credence that she might understand him on a better level than most of her counterparts in the series. She's one of the women that, even though she and Bond don't end up together, I could totally see them staking it out for a bit after the end of the film, and I wish the series would have allowed us to see her again in another adventure. At least for me, that would have been preferable to who we got in the next film. That longing wish of mine to see her again in another film is just the edge she needs to be this high on the list.
Who are you?
name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
The start of the really dirty names in this series, Pussy Galore makes up the perfect trifecta of casting for Goldfinger. Gert Frobe and Harold Sakata are amazing in their own camps, and Honor Blackman is of a similar status in hers. She's the best woman of the Connery era, which many fans view as the golden age of the franchise. She's a competent pilot who carries her own weight within Goldfinger's operations. She doesn't put up with Bond's crap, and it's not until the barn scene when she finally starts to come around to Bond's side. I also applaud the producers for finally casting a leading lady who was of a similar age to their Bond. These two have the best chemistry of the Connery films. They just feel like they go together. One of my big narrative problems with the film actually involves her, but she's innocent of that sin, so I won't hold it against her here. It's actually kind of remarkable she ends up this high on the list, because her first scene is way later into the film's runtime than I would like. I often hear fans put her up as one of the top 3 women of the series, and while she's certainly worthy of that conversation, I just happen to like a few others better.
Who is behind your attack on Severnaya?
Who would the authorization code?
Russia may have changed, but the penalty for terrorism is still death.
And what's
Mr.
the
Bond.
penalty for treason?
Oh, stop it, both of you! Stop it! You're like boys with toys.
The thing that makes a difference for me about the more realistic Bond women is when the character can keep their wits about them and become helpful in the quest. GoldenEye's Natalya Simonova is a great example of this, because while she does get captured at the archives through a somewhat contrived way, in every other bit of the film she's quite strong. She does some digging of her own into Ourumov, eludes Russian authorities, changes the GoldenEye access codes, and provides Bond a ride off the cradle at the end through holding a helicopter pilot hostage. Isabella Scorupco has a wonderful chemistry with Pierce Brosnan, with the best dialogue scene being with them on the beach. Every few films we get a moment where Bond is forced to reflect on the nature of his work, and this is the best in the series. Natalya calls Bond out for having to be so cold to do his job, and warns that it may get him killed. Unfortunately, this idea does not pan out to its furthest thematic conclusion in this film, but I feel like I have to give it some credit for having a scene like this and not making the Bond woman feel out of character to deliver it. Natalya is one of the best balancing acts in the series because she doesn't act frightened all the time, nor does she seem like a perpetual tough guy in every action scene.
Why do you persist in rescuing me, Mr. Bond?
It's becoming a habit, isn't it, Contessa Teresa?
Teresa was a saint. I'm known as Tracy.
Well, Tracy, next time play it safe and stand on 5.
People who want to stay alive play it safe.
You would hope that the first woman to truly win Bond's heart would be something special, and oh boy did they nail that here. Dame Diana Rigg shows off her prowess in acting in almost every role I've seen her in, and in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, she scales it back just enough so as not to overshadow Lazenby, but still be in the spotlight. That's a masterful bit of acting because that's a really tricky balance to pull off. This was George Lazenby's first role, and I think Diana really helped him to enhance their scenes. Wooden is the word I've used most often to describe Lazenby's performance, but his best moments are with her, and they actually feel like a real couple with genuine chemistry. It's not 100% there, but it's about as close as you could reasonably hope for. Her death is just a gut punch to me, as I've just watched a really sympathetic character go from suicidal tendencies to a woman who has found reason to live again. And so it's not just the tragedy of Bond losing his wife, it's the tragedy of losing a character who may have finally found peace when she was about to embark on her happiest days. The Bond films are usually not the place for complex character arcs, as they're just generally not those kinds of films. But Majesty's offered a chance to try, and I'm glad the filmmakers took a chance with it. Tracy is one of the most memorable characters in the series for me, and thus she comes out near the top of my list.
I'm the money.
Every penny of it.
The Treasury has agreed to stake you in the game.
Vesper. I do hope you gave your parents hell for that.
thank all that is holy for 2006's Casino Royale. Not only because it did a lot of good in repairing Bond's public image, but because it gives us some of the best characters in the series. Vesper Lynd was legendary even before this film, as she was Bond's first love in the novels and was pivotal in his character development. She was often referenced throughout that series, and the first couple of attempts to adapt her on screen really didn't do her justice. I had seen Eva Green in Kingdom of Heaven before this, and while she did a fine job there, I wasn't sure what to expect from her here. My goodness, did she give us one powerhouse of a character. The chemistry between her and Daniel Craig is beyond words for this series. It just works, and it's one of my favorite film romances outside of the pure romance genre. That relationship is a key part in the story, because if you don't fall in love with her alongside Bond, the film loses a massive part of its power. Green understood this and made sure to give us a very sympathetic and compelling character. Not since Tracy had we been given a chance to do something this meaningful with the Bond woman, and Green makes the most of it. I can understand the criticism that she flips from hating Bond to loving him fast, but I think some people may be overlooking a few things. First, there's the very tender and emotionally driven scene of healing in the shower with Bond. Second, she was starting to warm up to him even before she was kidnapped, and then he didn't hesitate to go rescue her, despite the fact that it's very obviously a trap. And finally, she had changed her mind enough about him by that point to successfully convince Quantum/Spectre to spare Bond's life. So by the time he wakes up to her standing over him at the care center, I buy that they've fallen for each other. Vesper does so much to help the film's themes about betrayal and the cost of love that her death is the final bit that leaves me a wreck by the time the scene ends. I have mixed feelings about how the subsequent films handled her influence on Bond, but I am totally convinced that her influence is that powerful on him, and I too have fond feelings about the character. This is why she takes the #1 slot on my list. What a wild ride this list has been for me. We've tackled scientists, secret agents, criminals, and everything in between. I really hope that eventually the public will wake up and realize that, while yes, this series often glorifies beauty at the expense of character depth, these characters are not as cut and dry as the stereotype suggests. Many of these women have large responsibilities within their respective films, and some of them have the entire crux of the film upon their shoulders. By the very fact that there is such a wide diversity of fans with the Bond films, I dare say these women do their respective jobs in helping to build an entertaining adventure for the public, and I look forward to seeing who else comes along with 007 for the ride in future installments.